The question is, I've been hearing people question if Jesus was a real historical figure. I know Josephus and Tacitus wrote about him, but I think this was after his death. What other things can I point out? Are there other historical figures that have worse evidence than Jesus?
Yeah, doesn't it seem like there's a couple of embedded views there in that question? One embedded view, it seems to me, is, yeah, it's true that Tacitus and Josephus are writing about this after the fact. But that really insinuates that I could only trust a non-Christian source to tell me anything reliable about Jesus. In other words, if you were saying, well, is there any early account of the life and ministry and death and resurrection of Jesus? Yeah, there are 4. They're in the Gospels. Well, no. I have to have something that's not a Christian source in order. Well, how about this? Let's just apply what we know we would apply to determine if an eyewitness is reliable to those 4 gospel accounts, because you might discover that that's really all you need, because those are reliable. Look, in the end, the other mentioning of Jesus, all the archaeological evidence, anything we could find that would support those 4 accounts, it's just there to support those 4 accounts. For me, the question is, why would you not trust the Gospels as reliable accounts related to Jesus? Now, you might offer, well, there I see contradictions. I see some differences. Okay, is that a good reason to? That never bothered me as a first investigator of the Gospels, because I saw so much of that in every set of eyewitnesses I ever interviewed. I never would get eyewitnesses to agree. It could have just happened 3 hours ago. They're not going to agree, and the texture of their disagreement is much like the texture of the differences in the Gospels. So I think the first question is, why is it that you think that the documents we call the Gospels are not an adequate historical record of the life of Jesus? And honestly, we always talk about this, and I'm not the first one to write about this, but how much it's always about how many documents do we have that describe the life of this person, this historical figure. How close are those documents to the actual life in terms of years? The earliest copies we have, how close are they? There's so many historical figures in antiquity that we have far fewer documents describing their life. They are separated by far more years from the earliest version we have to the life of that person, and we never for a second flinch on the historicity of those figures. But when it comes, I honestly think if Jesus didn't do anything supernatural, if all we had were a collection of nice, wise sermons by Jesus of Nazareth, nobody would doubt the historicity of Jesus. If you took out the miracles, you take out the resurrection, everyone's like, oh, no problem. Yeah, I think there's no reason not to believe he's not what didn't exist. I think the problem, of course, is really a bias against the supernatural. I remember one time asking Dan Wallace, not related to me, what is it that's at the root of this kind of skepticism about dating the Gospels, about, why is it all the skeptics want to date the Gospels well after 70 AD? And a lot of it is because there is just a bias against the supernatural. There's no way that Jesus could have accurately predicted the destruction of the temple. Therefore, they must be written after the destruction of the temple. So again, it's just a bias against supernatural. Mm-hmm. I think. I mean, I don't know anyone who answers more email from skeptics than you do. So tell me how you would respond to that.
Well, I want to comment quickly on something you mentioned earlier, which is objection that drives me crazy is when people say they can't trust the Gospels because they were biased. Well, the truth is, if somebody witnessed the resurrection, they're going to believe it. So how could you? I mean, it is actually logically impossible to get a record of Jesus' resurrection from somebody who didn't actually believe it. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. So what you want is, and I understand the it's kind of like, hey, you can't trust what the friends of Jesus said about Jesus because after all, they're the friends of Jesus, and I get that. But Matthew doesn't start off. He is so striking to me, and I'll tell you why. You could argue that Peter and Andrew, all these people have been prepped by John the Baptist to be looking for a Messiah, and then here comes Jesus, and John says, that's the one, and they are in, okay? But this is not Matthew. Matthew's not related. He doesn't have a brother who's in, who's trying to convince him. He doesn't have friends who are in, who say, hey, yeah, and he's not a disciple of John the Baptist. He's just a dude who's a tax collector, probably as far on the outside of the group as you can be. And yet, at the end, he writes this account. Not because he's inclined and biased or even looking for a Messiah by any record we have. That's not what's driving him. What's driving him is, I saw this stuff. And yeah, now I'm in. Okay, isn't that what happens in every eyewitness account? Somebody sees something and then they go to court and they're like, yeah, I'm convinced. That's not a bias. That's a conviction based on observation. Very different, I think. Thanks so much for watching our video. If it was helpful and useful to you, I'd really appreciate it if you would follow us, subscribe to our channel at the bottom link here in the video, and tell your friends. And please follow us on social media.